Okay, awesome. Today is Tuesday, January 31st, 2023. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup to SIG Network. This is a CNCF certified meeting, so please follow all the rules and be nice to each other, i.e. no cussing or making anyone feel bad. Those are the general rules for this meeting. We don't have much on the agenda today. Last time we talked a bit about Network Policy V2, and my plan for today was just to kind of continue with that conversation going off of a doc Dan has put together generously since the last meeting. Before we hop into that, we have some newer faces here. I'll just give you all a chance to kind of give an intro if you want. No worries if you don't, but if you're new to this meeting, you want to introduce yourself, feel free to go ahead and do it.
I can go first. Hi, hi everybody. Good morning, good evening. I'm K7 and I work for LinkedIn. My first meeting here. I've heard a lot of good things from somebody else out at Google about some of these SIG meetings, and this is my first day, so I'm hoping to learn. And I've started something on Cilium and evaluating Calico on implementing network policies for our next gen systems and stuff. So hoping to learn and learn the do's and especially what not to do stuff. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and thanks for this.
Awesome. Well, we're super happy to have you. We often forget that we've all been meeting for quite a long time. So if there's any questions, like stop us mid-meeting, we're happy to take them. You can also reach out in SIG Network Policy API Slack channel. So we're there to help. Feel free to reach out individually or in the channel, whatever. But yeah, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Anyone else? Going once, twice. Sold. I think everyone else has been here. Shane is dropping in. Thanks, Shane.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, for sure. So just kind of as a rewind, I alluded to it at the beginning. Last week, John Howard from, I believe, a service mesh group, I can't remember exactly which one, kind of came in and restarted pushing on some more features for network policy. And as usual, our answer is Network Policy V2, right? Like we are avoiding adding any new features to network policy, and we're looking towards the future of what V2 may look like. We're still looking for an owner for that. If anyone's watching this video and wants to spearhead this effort, we need the help. So reach out to us. That would be really great. But what came out of that was we had an old document that was started by some folks from Juniper Networks, who have since kind of stopped working here or stopped kind of coming to this subgroup meeting. And it's a bit stale. So our goal was to kind of roll over into a new document. Like, let's redefine some of the user stories, some of the ideas around Network Policy V2. In the last 2 weeks, Dan put together a document kind of highlighting some of his thoughts. So I thought we could just maybe run through these kind of quickly, give a shout out in general for people to give a look. But I think it gives a good overview of like the guiding principles, at least I think, that go with V2. Does everyone agree? Are there any questions on that so far? I know we're missing a lot of folks that were here last week, so makes it a little difficult.
So this document can be accessed how?
Do you not have access? I thought it was public.
I'm sorry, I'm
yeah. So this document, I'll share the link in the chat. It's in the agenda, which is a part of the calendar invite, but I'll also share it in the chat here so you can hop in.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I got it. Awesome. I didn't see you hop in. Sorry. That's great. Thank you. Yeah. So Dan's Network Policy V2 thoughts. Dan, I don't mean to put you on a spot. Do you want to run through these at a high level, or do you have any like overarching things to say? I don't think we need to necessarily like walk through this doc. I think it's a thing that folks need to go and read and get some comments on so that we can morph it into like a community doc.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can just like summarize each point pretty quickly. So the first one is just that, you know, while we always talk about network policy v2, like API v2 means something very specific in Kubernetes, and we don't actually want that. So we can keep calling it network policy v2, but people just need to keep in mind that it's not actually, we're going to have to change the name. It can't still be called network policy anymore. So my second suggestion was it needs to be fully interoperable with V1. I mean, it would be great if we could just say, yeah, we're just going to totally throw away V1 and forget about it. But like, you know, people will be installing bits of software that come from different places, and some of them may have been upgraded to know about network policy v2, and some of them might not, or they might want to like still be using v1 so that it's compatible with both old and new clusters and blah, blah, blah. So it's going to make things better for everybody if we can define things in a way so that they'll still be compatible. So
Yeah.
And Andrew and I argued a little bit about the semantics, and you can follow that side discussion there.
I added a little to it as well. I mean, I agree with you. It needs to be well defined. And then the question is, can we rewrite the V1 rules into V2 rules? So at least they're easier to compare. I think that
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is like a direct problem the Gateway API folks dealt with, going from Ingress to the Gateway API. And I know I posted a tool there, like they literally have a tool that converts Ingress objects to Gateway API objects. If it was my opinion, like obviously it needs to be well spec'd out, but I think I would say like this, instead of being fully interoperable, I think the feature set of network policy v2 needs to be like complete. It needs to include all of the features that network policy v1 already had, but expanded upon. So that you can express any network policy v1 object as a network policy v2 object.
And we sort of get to this later in the document, but my idea of network policy v2 is that it's actually two separate objects, or rather three: admin network policy, baseline admin network policy, and developer network policy. And so some individual network policies, the way I'm imagining this, would be expressible as either an admin network policy, or, well, you might need a combination of the different policy types rather than necessarily being able to convert any NPv1 object into a single v2. But you know,
that's
again,
fine. And are you include? I haven't read. I just gone through it, but for V2 multi-networking, are we keeping out of that from the policy perspective, or is that something we just have to accept that will come, and the V2 object to handle that? Or
so that multi-networking versus network policy is not something that I have thought a lot about, and so I didn't include it in this document. But other people who have strong thoughts about that should, you know, write up their thoughts about that, or figure out what everybody else needs to be thinking about, or whatever.
So my thought on that is that the current network policies are nice in that they have very few addresses in there. They talk about object to object communication, and it doesn't say anything about which network that is used for this communication, and therefore it should in reality also cover multi-networking. That would be my default sort of standpoint.
I think, in my opinion, like we need to give the base framework for multi-networking to be accomplished with network policy v2, but I don't think it's necessarily this group's job to figure that out, just because the multi-network group is, you know, already have a bunch of time invested, right? And I think it's going to highly depend on what they come up with at the end of the day. So I think it needs to be built such that we can expand to support whatever comes out of that working group. I don't know when that's going to be. Obviously, Per, maybe you have a better idea on that.
Yeah, no, it's like or push them in that the semantics should map there. I think it has a lot more to do with being able to say if something belongs to a cluster or not. When you have an address, I mean, the cost of implementing this can be kept quite normal or very high. But sorry for pushing that. But
yeah, we should not I think we shouldn't try to push all of this onto multi-network. Like we should be explicitly thinking about both multi-network and multi-cluster, because those are both cases where existing network policy is not good enough. And if we're redesigning everything, we want to include all the important things in design. And I didn't mention either of those in this doc. So yeah.
Cool. No, I think it's important. Let's keep it in mind. This doc, I think, is like kind of some overarching ideas about NPv2. When it comes down to the actual user stories, we're going to have to spend a lot of time as a group hashing out each one. And I think multi-network will definitely be one of them.
Yeah, I'm super happy you mentioned the multi-cluster as well, because to get it in the semantics and have the expressibility at least in there, I think is important.
Yep. Or at the very least, we want to make sure that we're not doing anything that will hurt multi-cluster network policy in the future or interfere with. So let me just try to get through the rest of this. NPv2 needs to be extensible. So I think everybody understands this. When we keep running into these problems where like we want to add a new field, but like service selector, and then you're like, oh, but you can't, because then old implementations won't see it and they'll interpret it incorrectly. So we need to figure out a way to deal with that, like once and for all. Need fewer gotchas. You can read the details there, but everybody knows network policy v1 is tricky and confusing, and we don't like that. So we don't want NPv2 to be NPv1, but just more, like, and go through and read. Like, network policy v1 evolved in a way that was very different from how it was originally designed, and as a result, it's a complete mess, and we don't want that. So we need to like go back to basics and figure out how to have a clean, well-designed NPv2. Which in particular means the next bullet point, we need to be very clear about when we're doing policies for administrators and when we're doing policies for the application developers or application deployers. And I'm proposing that we keep those separate. So we adopt admin network policy as being the first half of NPv2, and then we work on a second developer network policy to cover the application side of it. And then the two of them combined are NPv2.
Yeah, I think this is really key because there's a lot of confusion. Like we've tried to clear up with this document, or Dan has, about network policy v2, and bringing admin network policy to full makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know if folks feel differently.
Because and this also simplifies things in a way, because like network policy v1 has things like egress IP block policies, but the thing is, like, no application developer actually wants to say, I want to prevent my pod from talking to this thing. Like, because if you want to prevent egress, just don't make the connection, right? It's only administrators who care about blocking egress. So
and the admin would kill any designer that said, I want to be able to talk to this address. Like, okay, what's going on here? Why is it leaking?
Right. Why are you doing that in your application? No, I totally agree. There's a lot of like weird gotchas like that. So I think this is
exactly the different views into the policy system. And they should be based on what those roles and views can manage. So yeah. I completely agree on that.
And actually, so another tie-in here is that some of the use cases that I talk about, like we may want to end up pulling in the fully qualified domain name network policy stuff, which I still don't know how we're going to do well, but like. But people really do want that.
I don't even think it's been an argument of how we're going to do it from an API sense. It's been an argument. It's been that kind of backwards argument of you can't put that in your API because we can't implement it. Right. And nobody's really hashed out that it. I mean, people do it already, and we end up always digressing into an argument of like, is this actually a good implementation? Which really shouldn't be part of the API design.
Well, we shouldn't design an API that can only be implemented in bad ways.
Fair enough. We've done it before.
But we know that some administrators want to say pods can only egress if they have explicitly created a policy saying what they're going to egress to. And if you're going to do that, then pods need to be able to create something saying, I need to egress to api.example.com. And then, so, but anyway,
it comes down to how are you egressing, right? Are you doing it at the sort of layer 3, layer 4 level, or are you doing it at sort of layer 7 layer? And the answers becomes different, right? At one level,
yes.
layer 7, you actually see this URL, but at the other, the translation happens somewhere.
And maybe, do we want layer 7 network policy? That is another thing that has been brought up before that there is still an open issue about. So yeah, lots of stuff for us to discuss when we get below this high level stuff in this doc and down into the actual user stories.
I think we should have it in when we start thinking and sort of see, is it needed, or sort of what happens, and not start without it. I mean,
yeah, I totally agree. So in my personal opinion, like, this doc's awesome. If I'm gonna let the review continue, and maybe next time, if no one has any objections, we're gonna we can just change, and Dan doesn't have any objections, we can just change this to network policy v2 thoughts, and it can be kind of like the start of our investigation into this. I'm also happy to make another doc and just copy and paste some of this stuff, or try to organize it differently if folks think that's better. But ultimately, if we can all agree on these like guiding principles to start, I think it'll make our digression into user story discussion a lot easier, which obviously is the next step.
I agree. Get some decisions out of this. I mean, the stuff, and then fill it like with the use cases afterwards.
Yeah, but I think it's a really great start. It's stuff we've talked around for a long time, and Dan has put into words, which is what always needs to be done. So huge shout out to Dan. Thanks so much. This is really, really great. For folks watching, please take a look at this. We'll talk about it again next meeting, and hopefully actually start down the path of getting some stuff done with network policy v2, because obviously we need it. Any other questions, comments about this? Cool. Nothing really. There's nothing on the agenda, but there's still some open issues on our repo around website changes and getting stuff done for admin network policy. Brian, I know, is working on some stuff kind of in a band. He's in the meeting, but he actually just had a child. So congrats, Brian. That's awesome. But he's looking at working on Cyclonus and some integration testing bits for admin network policy. Thuria is looking at integration and implementation of Kubernetes. So things are moving along, albeit very slowly. Feel free, both of y'all, at any point, not today, you don't have to give an update on where you are to this group. We're all happy to hear about it. So. Cool. I don't have anything else for today. If there's no questions, I'm happy to end the meeting early. I'll open up the floor. Going once, going twice. Sold.
Cheers.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming, everyone, and thanks, Dan, for the doc. We'll continue pushing forward on it.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Have a nice week.
Yep,
Cheers.
you too. Bye.